Welcome to the Mind Fuck podcast. My name is Wonu Alishe, and sometimes I do go by Amazing Soul. And I have to mention, FCK stands for fun, compassion, and kindness. On the Mindfuck podcast, we essentially talk about nervous system regulation, inner child healing, and how to truly start feeling safe in our bodies. I share my lived experiences, and we remember to have a sprinkle of fun along the journey. So I want to thank you so much for taking time out to hang out with me in the next few minutes. We have like a little tradition that we usually do on the show where I read a list and I title that list Reminders to Being Human. The intention behind reading that list every time is to remind myself and also in turn remind you on your journey. All right, here we go. Reminders to being human. Have fun along the journey. Show yourself compassion. Be kind to others. Being complex and being simple can hold true in the same breath. Stay curious. Hold space for pauses. Hold space for not knowing. Never underestimate the power of silence. Nature has a lot of wisdom. Pay attention. There is power in we than I. If nothing else makes sense, come back to love. Pain is our greatest teacher. And the very last one, never underestimate your ripple of existence. Yay! Welcome once again, my friend. Now let's get into the fun part of the show. Today, I want to talk to you about something that happens in your mind almost every day. And most of the time, you don't even notice it is happening. Your mind takes one tiny piece of information and quietly turns it into a full story. Not a fact, not something verified, just a story, right? And the tricky part is this. Once the story forms in your brain, your body starts reacting to it as if it is real. I mean, your chest starts to tighten, your stomach drops, and your thoughts start to race. All from something that may have started as a very small assumption. I want to explore this with you today in a very human way. Not from a psychological textbook, but from everyday human day-to-day life. Because I have caught my own mind doing this so many times than I can count. And the moment you start noticing it, something interesting happens, right? You begin to see how powerful and sometimes misleading our human mind can be. Let me start with a simple scene, right? Let's just say you send someone a text message. Maybe it's your friend or it's your partner or it's someone from work, right? And you see that little notification on your phone, delivered, right? And a few minutes go by, it changes from delivered to read. And then nothing. 10 minutes pass, 20 minutes pass, and suddenly your mind starts moving. Your mind starts going with thoughts like, oh my God, did I say something wrong? Okay, maybe they're upset with me. Maybe they're just ignoring me. Oh, okay, are they losing interest in me? Now, notice what just happened, right? Notice how those thoughts came about. All you actually know as a fact is this: they read the message. That's it. That's the only fact that you know. But your mind starts filling in the rest of the story. And if you're really honest with yourself, sometimes the story gets more dramatic than the longer silence lasts. Now, suddenly, your mood starts to change. You start replaying the message you sent. You reread the message like 3 or 4 times. You analyze your tone. You start to wonder, did I use the wrong emoji? Man, and by the time they finally respond, maybe an hour later, your mind has already written an entire novel from the fact that it just read the message. Only for them to reply with something simple like this: oh my God, I'm so sorry. I was driving when I got your message. And just like that, the story collapses. But while it was happening, your body was reacting in real time like it was real. Very interesting. Now, I want to share something very personal here because I I used to notice this pattern a lot, especially during the periods where my nervous system was already under a lot of stress. I mean, back in 2022, when I was just transitioning out of the army, dealing with chronic lower back pain and a lot of uncertainty in my life, my mind was constantly trying to predict what was going to happen next in my life. And when the mind is in survival mode, assumptions become really loud. One small piece of information would appear, and my mind would instantly start connecting the dots that were not even confirmed. For example, if someone did not respond to me quickly, my mind might jump to, okay, I think I did something wrong. Are they upset with me? If someone's tone sounded slightly different on the phone, my mind might think, maybe I did something wrong. But what I eventually started to notice was this. My mind wasn't trying to harm me. No, 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 no. No. It was simply trying to protect me. You see, something I have realized on my journey is the brain is simply a prediction machine. That's it. It's wired to predict because it constantly scans for patterns so it can anticipate what might happen next. Now, the problem with that is sometimes the brain fills in the blanks with incomplete information. And the story the brain creates can be very convincing. Right. Now, let's look at another everyday example, right? You walk into a room, two people stop talking when you're walking, right? Immediately, your mind goes, okay, they were definitely talking about me. But I want you to pause and think about how many other possibilities exist. Maybe they just finished their conversation. Maybe they were discussing something private. Maybe the conversation simply paused the moment you walked into the room. But the mind tends to default to a story where we are the center of the situation. And once that story forms in the mind, it colors how we interpret everything that follows after that. I mean, you start paying attention to their body language, you notice their tone, you analyze every word, and suddenly your nervous system in real time is reacting to a situation that might not even exist. Wow. Another common example that I have seen is you wave at someone across the street. They look in your direction, but they don't wave back. Ouch. It's the story that the mind, goes into. They're ignoring me. They don't like me. Or they might just be acting strange instantly. But what we don't consider is that maybe they didn't actually see you. Just maybe. Maybe they were distracted. Or maybe they were even thinking about something else. Right? But the challenge is once the story forms, your mind locks into that story. And then something interesting happens. Your brain starts looking for evidence that confirms the story in your mind. This is something that psychologists call confirmation bias. When we believe something, our mind begins to filter information in a way that supports that belief. So if your mind already believes someone doesn't like you, every neutral action they take starts looking like proof. A delayed reply, a short response, a neutral facial expression all become evidence in air quotes for the story playing in your mind. All right. So now I think this is the part where I want to slow this down for a moment because the goal here isn't to judge the mind at all. No, the mind does this because uncertainty feels uncomfortable. That's why the mind does this. The brain prefers a story over not knowing, even if the story is wrong, because uncertainty means the brain doesn't have control over what happens next. So instead, the brain fills the gaps. It's very interesting how the 3-pound brain works in relation to our body and nervous system. I remember one very small moment that actually made me laugh at myself. I had sent a message to someone about something important. I mean, hours passed, no response. And my mind quietly started building a story and said, maybe I said something wrong. Maybe I didn't word it right. Maybe I should have put more emojis in the message. Eventually, the reply came back and they said, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I fell asleep." That was it. And all that mental storytelling I was, telling myself for something so simple. And when that happens, you start realizing something about the mind. Ugh, it is incredibly creative. Woo-wee. Sometimes a little too creative, I must say. And I think another place that I see this, show up a lot on social media. I mean, you post something, then you check the reactions. I'm very guilty of this. Still working on my own response to this. And maybe fewer people responded than usual. Suddenly, the mind starts saying things like, "Oh my God, people don't actually like what I just posted. Did I write something wrong in the post? Okay, maybe I shouldn't share this kind of content." And the story goes on and on and on and on and on. But the reality could be something completely different. Just maybe the algorithm didn't show that to your content to many people. Or maybe people were busy. Or maybe it reached a smaller audience that day. There's just so many endless possibilities. But the mind often jumps to the most personal interpretation first. I personally have caught myself doing this so many times, while building and sharing my work online, there are moments where I thought to myself, maybe people are not connecting what I'm saying. Oh, maybe I keep repeating myself. Maybe what I'm sharing with people is not landing like it should. I mean, those are the thoughts that go through my mind. And those moments feel very real in the moment. I mean, those thoughts feel very real in the moment. But when I step back, when I give myself permission to step back, I realize something. The mind is filling in the unknown spaces with assumptions. And assumptions often sound very convincing. Ooh, but they're still assumptions. They're not facts. Okay, now that we know what the mind does, right, with the assumptions, what do we do with this? How do we work with a mind that naturally creates stories? For me, it started with one simple practice: noticing, awareness, just noticing and being aware of my thoughts. That's it. Now, when I feel a strong emotional reaction, I pause for a moment and I ask myself, Wonu, what do I actually know right now? Not the story, just facts. What is true right now? For example, let's just say they haven't responded to a text message. Now, that's a fact, right? But the story might be, oh, they're ignoring me. You see, two very different things. Now, when we have the ability to separate the fact from the story, something interesting happens. The emotional intensity attached to the story over time often softens because your nervous system realizes that the situation might not be as threatening as the story suggests. That's the power of noticing and being aware of your thoughts. Another thing I have learned is that the mind loves closure. It wants to finish the puzzle quickly, right? But sometimes the healthiest response is simply allowing space for not knowing. You do not have to complete every story immediately. You can leave the blank space open. And I have seen on my journey that takes intention, that takes practice, because the mind constantly wants certainty. But uncertainty is actually very, very normal of being a human being. It's just what it is, right? And actually remember one time I was actually sitting with a friend who was worried because someone hadn't replied him for a few hours. And, they said to me, I just know something is wrong. And, I asked them a simple question. What else could be true? Right? What else could be true? You know something is wrong, but what else could be true? And that question alone opened up multiple possibilities. Maybe the person was busy, maybe their phone died, maybe they simply hadn't seen the message, right? Suddenly, with those possibilities, the mind had more than one story available. And when there are multiple possible explanations, the nervous system often relaxes because it's no longer locked into a single narrative, single negative narrative. That's the power of multiple possibilities. Now, one thing I want you to understand is this, my friend. Having these stories doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. No, 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 no. This is simply a natural part of how the human brain works, right? The brain evolved to detect patterns and predict danger. That's the primary function of our brains. I mean, thousands of years ago, assuming the worst sometimes kept people alive. It was a survival strategy. But in modern life right now, the same mechanism can create unnecessary stress in our lives. So the practice isn't eliminating the mind storytelling. No, it's actually impossible to do that. You can't stop your thoughts, right? The practice is simply recognizing it, being aware of it, noticing it. And once you start noticing it, you begin to smile at the thought sometimes. Like, oh, I see. Oh, I see. I mean, you can catch your mind halfway through writing a dramatic story and think, ah, there it is. And that moment of awareness creates space between your thought and the story, space between assumption and the reaction. And in that space of awareness, you get to choose a different response. So the next time, my friend, you notice your mind building a story from a small piece of information, I want you to pause. Ask yourself, what do I actually know for a fact right now? And then gently remind your mind that not every unanswered question needs an immediate story. Sometimes in my journey, the most honest answer can be simply, I don't know yet. And surprisingly, that can bring a lot more peace than stories we often create in our minds. Because when you really begin to observe the mind, we start to realize something very interesting. Many of the stressful stories we carry along in our brains all day were never confirmed to begin with. They were simply assumptions that the mind quietly turned into narratives. And the moment you start seeing that, start becoming aware of that, you start to relate to your thoughts in a very different way. Not as absolute truth, but as possibilities your mind is simply exploring. Can be accurate. Some of those thoughts can be accurate. Some completely invented. And learning to simply notice that difference, oof, I have seen on my journey, can change how you experience a lot of situations in your life, right? So if you catch your mind doing this today, don't fight it. No, the mind is doing what it got to do to protect you, right? Just notice what the mind is doing. Because awareness alone has a very interesting effect on our minds. And the moment you see the story forming in real time, oh my God, it starts to lose some of its power, some of the emotional charge, right? And little by little, tiny moments, you begin to live more in what is actually happening in the present instead of the stories the mind quietly creates. That is the power of noticing our thoughts. That is the power of awareness. And if you're honest with yourself, you might just realize your mind has probably written hundreds of stories today already. Some about people, some about situations, some even about yourself. So the question isn't whether the mind will create stories. It will always will. It's naturally wired that way. The real question is, would you believe every story your mind tells you? Or would you give yourself permission to pause long enough to see that sometimes it's just the mind doing what it had always done in the past, trying to make sense of the unknown, one assumption at a time. As always, my friend, I want to thank you and I appreciate you for listening. I want to thank you so much for being here. And I'm sending you so much love from my heart to yours. Thank you.